Thanks, Joe, and thanks to Kitchen Warehouse for having us here today. Welcome, breadheads. I'm so glad you could tune in. Today we're going to be running through an artisan sourdough recipe. This is sort of a step up from our usual beginner's sourdough. We're going to be dealing with some slightly different techniques and higher hydrations, which is going to give us a more open crumb and that really nice, deeply caramelized crust that we all love. So if I can just quickly take you through the outline, we're going to be talking through a starter prep, how to build a leaven, the Autolyse process, adding the leaven and then the salt, lamination, coil fold, then we'll move into the bulk proof stage. We're going to sort of mix things up and do a cold final proof overnight, and then we're going to do our shaping and our score and our bake. So 10 steps. Now, the 3 top tips for this, for getting that really nice artisan loaf, is really just, upping your hydration. That's going to help build extensibility in the dough. Building strength, that's really important to be able to achieve that open crumb. And we're going to do that through some extended stretch and fold techniques. And then having a spot on bulk proof. But the most important thing that underpins everything else is that it all starts with our starter. So let's move on to step 1 and talk about our starter prep. So I've got a rye starter here. I keep mine in the fridge usually, and I pull it out sort of 2 days before I want to bake. And what I've done with this over that 2-day period is just really amped it up. So normally you might get your sourdough starter out and refresh it maybe once or twice before you're going to bake. But when you want to do a really artisan loaf, you really need to make sure that this starter is in tip-top form. So to achieve that, what we've done is over a 2-day period, we've taken it out of the fridge, we've activated it by giving it a good feed of whatever flour you're feeding it and some water. Then we give that a sort of 12 to 24 hour rest at room temperature, and then we do it again. Now you do have to discard some of your starter in order to build up that activity, but please don't throw it away. We're going to be working with really minimal amounts of flour just to try and minimize the waste. And don't throw that discard out. That's really good stuff. You've paid for that flour, it's been grown. Flour is a precious commodity right now. So when you're halving your starter, getting ready to refresh and feed again, put that into a separate jar and pop that in the fridge. And you can build that up to then make some other recipes with. There's a few of those on my website if you have a look. Right, so we've refreshed it twice, we've dealt with the smaller amounts of starter, and we've collected all of the extra starter for our additional recipes. Now, once your starter is doubling like that, see I've got a little elastic band on there to show what start level I had, and I can see now very easily that that's doubled. Now I fed this morning, probably about 3 or 4 hours ago, and it's doubled in that time, and it's looking really nice and active. Nice little dome top on that. Look at all them bubbles. That's good signs of a really nice active sourdough starter. So we're on the right track to making a great loaf here. Now, when you're happy with the activity of your starter and it's doubling easily at room temperature within a few hours, we're going to move on and build our leaven. Now, just a reminder, we're going to be dealing with some slightly more advanced techniques here. If you are new to sourdough, it's probably a good idea to just check the beginner's stuff, just to get familiar with some of the terminology that we're going to be using, and also for just a really good intro to the sourdough process. But yes, so we're going to build a leaven, and a leaven is basically just a younger, fresher starter that we've built particularly for our recipe, so that we can use all of that in the recipe. Now, what we do is we're going to get ourselves a fresh little jar. I've got a nice little 290 ml jar here. Things to look out for when you're trying to find a good jar. You want quite a compact size so we can easily track the rise. You want straight sides, so it's easy to get your spatula in. And glass I find is really good because it's thermally stable, which is a good thing when you're dealing with live culture. So, first things first, let's get our digital scales, switch that on, get the lid off, zero it, and now what we're going to do is go in with our sourdough starter. So, we're going to get a little bit of our very, very active sourdough starter here. And we're going to feed it in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 2 with flour and water. And up to this point, it's been fine to use whatever flour that your culture is built on, but this is now our opportunity to switch the flour out for whatever we're going to be using in our recipe. And today, that's going to be a really strong baker's flour and a nice organic stone ground wholemeal. So, let's get our starter culture in here. We're going to make up enough to bake with, so we want to get 20 grams of our starter culture into our fresh little jar here. Okay, plop that in, 16, we're almost there. Scrape that off. Spot on. Okay, so our 20 grams of starter is in the jar. Now we're going to go in with a little bit of our strong organic stone ground baker's flour. Now, for an artisan loaf, you want to try and find a really high protein flour, a really good quality one. It really does translate to a better loaf at the end of the day. So we're using a flour here that's about 13% protein, and we're going to go in with 30 grams of that. Okay, so in with our 30 grams of our white flour. And what that's doing is just introducing some strength and structure early on in the process. Now, to make it up to our double the amount of starter, we're going to add 10 grams of our wholemeal flour. So get that in there. There we go. So that gives us 20 grams of starter in the jar and 40 grams in total of flour. And we're using about 20% wholemeal flour in our recipe. So that's what we're going to use in our leaven as well. Easy. Now we need to go in with 40 grams of water. Room temperature water is perfect. Tap water is fine. Filtered is better if you've got it. And room temperature is sort of what we want, but if you wanted to try and speed up the process, you could go in with a slightly warmer water temperature and convert the sort of flip side of that is if it's a particularly hot day and you want to slow things down, you can use a cooler water temperature, and that's just going to control the timings for us a little bit. So in with our 40 grams of water. There we go. Okay, just going to give that a bit of a mix now, and I'm going to mix it quite vigorously because we want to build up that strength in it straight away so that it bubbles up really nicely. We want it to trap all the gas that's produced in there, so just get your little spatula right down to the bottom of the jar, work it, give those guns a bit of a workout, and mix it up nicely. So it's going to be about the consistency of peanut butter or like a thick oats porridge. That's what we're going for. And I'm just giving it a little bit of extra mixing to try and build up that gluten and dough strength straight away. Okay, so just scrape that down a little bit. If you scrape the sides, it's easier to track the progress. And what we can also do to help us with that is, I'll just borrow this elastic band quickly from our starter. We'll just pop that on there to mark the start level so we know where things have kicked off and we can track our progress. Now what we're looking for with this is we want it to triple in size, and that's going to tell us that our leaven and our sourdough cultures are sort of in peak form top activity, gives us the max potential for rise in our loaf. Okay, so just adjust that. We're going to cover it, leave it on the bench, room temperature, and we're going to leave it to rise for anywhere between 3 and 5 hours. It's all temperature dependent, but just keep an eye on it, and within a few hours you should have your your leaven looking a little bit like that. So that has pretty much tripled in size. We've got loads of bubbles there, heaps of activity, and the trick here is you want to try and catch it on the rise, not on the fall. So when your starter has peaked, it's essentially used pretty much all of the food available in the flour, and it's going to start to sink. So when it starts sinking, it actually produces a little bit more lactic acid. It's going to be a lot more sour. That also translates to occasionally to sort of almost having a detrimental effect on the dough. So we want to catch it on the rise, nice and fresh, sweet smelling. So this is now perfect to start building our recipe.
Hey everyone, I forgot to say the recipe is already up on the blog as well, so if some of you are finding it a little bit hard to hear with the background noise, the shop's open, so and we have a lovely Ange with the soft voice as well.
Sorry about that.
It's okay, we're trying. But there is a recipe up on the blog as well, and it's already there and you'll be able to have a look at it.
Yep.
So,
and we are going to recap as well.
yes.
And if anything's not quite clear, feel free to shoot through a comment and I'll do my best to answer it. Okay, I'll try and speak up a little bit more. But yeah, it is a bit loud in here, always a bit of a challenge when we've got such a big open space. Right, so we've talked about our starter prep, we've built our leaven, and we're now at the stage where we're going to actually mix our ingredients for our dough. Exciting times. So get yourself a nice big glass bowl, pop that on your scales, and you'll see in the notes that I've given you quantities for 2 sizes of loaves. You can either go in for a 1 pound loaf or a slightly bigger 1.5 pound loaf. We're going to be doing the 1.5 pound loaf today because that translates to the bannetons we have. So the 1 pound loaf is scaled to this little banneton here, which is the small ones that you can get from Kitchen Warehouse, and the 1.5 pound loaf is actually scaled to these slightly larger, medium-sized bannetons. I think that's what it is on the website. So have a look for those, and that's what we're going to be using today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, to achieve our nice open crumb in our artisan loaf, we're going to be using a much higher hydration than you might be used to with the beginner's recipe. But yeah, I'm sure by now that might be getting a little bit stale, so we're going to teach you a few fresh new moves and another recipe to play around with. So what we're going to do is go in with our ingredients. So you'll find the recipe on the page. Looks a bit like that, right? And you'll see we've got the 1 pound loaf and the 1.5 pound loaf. We've also got your baker's percentages there for you. Okay, so I always like to go in with my water first. Now our water is going to be about 80% of the total flour amount. So that's the hydration we're working with today. I think it's about 78, but we'll round it up and say it's 80%. So get our tepid or room temperature water into our bowl. We want 250 mils of that going in. There we go. Okay, next thing I like to do is go in with our wholemeal. So, nice wholemeal organic wheat flour here. If you don't have any of that available, you can swap it out for a wholemeal spelt flour or something similar. You should get pretty comparable results with that. But yeah, if you can, try and stick to the recipe's ingredients because you're just going to get more consistent results. Okay, now this is 70 grams of wholemeal flour, which translates to about 20% of our total flour in the recipe. Now we're introducing slightly more wholemeal in this because we want to get a really good fermentation. We want that bulk fermentation to be spot on. So having additional wholemeal in there introduces some more of our yeasty beasties, of course.
And someone, Anne and Mariella, are asking about gluten-free. Do you have any solution to gluten-free within your recipe, or?
Well, gluten is kind of fundamental to the whole sourdough process. There are some really good recipes out there for achieving a completely gluten-free loaf. It's not something I've played around with though, but I think you need a fair few more ingredients and a few additives. I really like doing a natural sourdough, the original kind of recipe, because it's just 3 ingredients, it's simple. And if you do find that you're maybe just a bit sensitive to gluten, like have a gluten sensitivity rather than full-on proper celiac, a lot of people actually find that sourdough is a lot easier on them and they can actually enjoy a bit of sourdough because it's a lot more gentle on the gut. So if you're in that school, then it might be worth trying it out. If not, then get on there and do a little bit of Googling. I know that Yoki from Wild Yeast Sourdough, she does a really nice gluten-free recipe, so check that out. But hopefully you can still pick up some of the tips and techniques from this process today. Alright, so back on. We've got our wholemeal flour into there. That's going to introduce some more of the enzymes, which are going to give us a really good strong fermentation, which is what we want with our artisan sourdough. So I just like to give that a little mix through first, just to make sure it's evenly distributed throughout the dough. And now we're going to go in with our remaining flour, which is the remaining 80% of our flour content, and that's our nice strong baker's white flour. And I think this is about 13% gluten. And I'm using whole grain milling co-flour. They're a really good one to look out for. And we've gone in with 250 grams of our white flour. Right, give that a good mix. And what we're doing at this stage is we're just really just combining the wet and dry ingredients. So we're up to the Autolyse stage, and what we want to do is make sure that we mix all of our flour and water until there's no more dry bits, and that's going to allow the little particles of flour to soak up all the available water, and that's going to activate the gluten for us. So this process is kind of a lazy process. I like using a no-knead process. We can achieve the same results that way. You don't actually need to knead the dough. I mean, maybe some days you do, a bit stressy, then it's always good to work that out. But the dough is actually going to start forming all of those gluten bonds and developing that extensibility on its own without too much input from us. So if we just mix that through nicely, make sure we've got no more dry bits of flour, just have a look at the bottom of the bowl and make sure there's no scraps down there. That always catches me out. Nice shaggy rough ball of dough, that's sort of what we're going for. And that's about that. So it's a really good, once you've built your leaven, it's a really good point to then mix your flour and water and kickstart the Autolyse process, because we're going to go for an extended Autolyse process for our artisan sourdough. As I mentioned earlier, that's going to help improve the extensibility of the dough. So we want to give this between 2 and 5 hours of just resting at room temperature. And what you'll find, I'll just get some water so I can wet my hand. What you'll find is initially the dough is not going to have any extensibility. So if we go in there and grab a little pinch of it and stretch it up, it's just going to fall apart. It's going to break up, no stretch, no structure. It's not sort of keeping together at all there. But if we let that rest, just lightly covered at room temperature for a few hours, I like to cover it up with a shower cap, but if you've got a tea towel knocking around, that'll do the job as well. Dinner plate over the top, that also does the job. We'll swap that out now for one that I started early on this morning, and we'll just have a little look here at how much things have changed. So, straight away, it's looking like it's relaxed a little bit. That's always a good thing. It's looking a little bit more shiny, and the real difference will be that gluten development. So if we get in there, pinch up a little bit, look at that extensibility. I mean, come on, that is awesome. And that's without any kneading. So we can pinch up a good chunk of that, and that's getting us off to a great start for making our very strong and extensible dough for our artisan loaf. Really happy with that. So, that brings us on to the next step. Now we're going to incorporate our leaven and kickstart the fermentation. So, we're going to grab the leaven we prepared earlier, which is right here. I suffer from what my husband calls crystal blindness. I can't see stuff straight in front of me. It's an affliction. Anyway, there is our nice leaven, tripled in size, nice and active, and we're going to plop that in there. And we're going to go in with about 20% in relation to the rest of our recipe. So that's going to be 70 grams. So let's just get our 70 grams of nice active leaven straight in on top of our dough. And that's going to be most of what's in your jar. We don't want any waste with this process if we can help it. If you end up with a little bit extra in the jar like I have, awesome. Chuck it in your jar of extra starter that you've got going in the fridge for all those other fun recipes to keep you busy and out of trouble. So, what we're going to do now is this will be a technique familiar to people who've seen our beginners class. We're just going to go in there with some light little stretch and folds quickly with a wet hand, just to incorporate that leaven. So just wet your hand and get your fingers right down to the bottom of the bowl, lift it up, stretch it out, and fold it over the top. Okay, really easy, nice, therapeutic, cathartic technique there. And what we're doing is we're just building some little layers within the dough, making sure that our leaven is evenly incorporated through it. And that's going to give us an early structure that will help trap those little gas bubbles as they get produced by the culture there. So, just mix that through. I like to just sort of flip it over at the end and round it off, just because I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to this kind of thing. Give that a little pat down. And now, we're going to let that have a short rest at room temperature. Just cover it over again. Give it 10 to 20 minutes if you can, just to rest and let that let everything sort of come together in its own time. You can have a little rest as well, which is always a bonus. But we're just going to go straight in now with incorporating our salt. So, where are we up to? Step 5. We're halfway through the process already, guys. Cooking with gas today. Alright, so I'm using a nice unrefined artisan salt here. It's really worth looking around, shopping around, and trying to find one that actually says unrefined, no additives, no preservatives, because it's a much better quality ingredient. And we want only the best for our sourdough loaf. So 2% salt going into our recipe here, and that's 7 grams. So I just like to sprinkle that over, get it in there. If there's a bit left, unleash your inner salt bay, get that in. And then again, wet hands, just dimple that through. And I just like to push my fingers right down to the bottom of the bowl to make sure that's nicely incorporated. So, not really a technique, but good fun anyway. You can also sort of squelch it in, give it a little scrunch. The aim of the game here is to just incorporate that salt. And then we can go in with some more stretchy fold. We go nice and stretchy. Work on them guns. Give the dough a little workout, and you get a little workout. Bonus, right? So, when you feel that the salt is evenly incorporated, you also sort of feel that the salt's dissolved. Initially you'll feel those little salt crystals on your fingers. Once you can't really feel those anymore, and you've got a nice stretchy elastic dough. It's sort of bouncing back into a little ball, then we know we're on the money. So that's looking pretty good to me. And what I'm going to do now is just cover that, leave it at room temperature for 20 to 40 minutes. Remember, the timings are always temperature dependent, and we've got quite a warm day today. So I would probably leave that for about 20-25 minutes before I moved on to the next step, which is, exciting things, new technique peeps, our lamination stage. And this one's good fun. So, over here, I've got some dough that has been resting after incorporating the leaven and the salt. And what we're going to do now is laminate it. So I'll just make myself a bit of space here, clear away a few things, get the scale out of the way, have a little bit of a tidy up, make sure I've got enough space to work with here because we're going to need a bit of space for this part. Those out the way. All right, now you'll want to keep your water handy, and it's also really good to have a little spray bottle like this at hand. So what we're going to do is we are going to tip our dough out of this little bowl onto the countertop, and then we're going to stretch it out really thin and laminate it. So we're going to do what I like to call the book fold. We're going to stretch it out to pretty much cover our little space of countertop here, probably to about A4, A3 size, and then we're going to fold it up. So we're going to fold it up, building up those layers, and I'll show you that process now. So let's get our squirty bottle and just wet our countertop down, because we don't want the dough to stick to the countertop. Also helps to just get a little bit of water over the top of the dough. And now you're going to want to grab a little dough scraper like this, really handy. Wet that down as well, and just loosen your dough from the sides of the bowl. Just run it around the edges like that, just to sort of ease it out. And this is going to really help with developing that strength that we need in our dough to achieve our nice artisan loaf. Right, now just sort of ease that out onto the countertop. Get that out. Oh, look at that gluten development already. Can you see those strands? It's beautiful. Now, I mentioned we're doing this to get strength in our dough. What we're also doing is sort of organizing the gluten within the dough. It's kind of like taking the gluten strands from 2-minute noodles to spaghetti, and this is how we do it. So wet your hands and just start stretching out the dough, pulling from the center. Don't pull it more than it wants to go, just work with the dough here. We don't want to tear it, we just want to gently stretch it out, nice and thin, across our bench. And this is a technique I picked up on Instagram from Foolproof Baking, and I think she got it from Autumn Baking. So it's great to have that community of bakers to learn from. Really good. But this technique works so well, and it helps us achieve our really strong extensible dough all by hand. But if you wanted to, you could always just whiz it up in a KitchenAid, which I occasionally do when I'm feeling particularly lazy. However, it's good to go through the whole process by hand, because it really is, it's a science and an art. You know, it's a really intuitive process. You've really got to tune into the dough, listen to the dough, listen to your senses to get good results with sourdough. It's so much fun. It's basically, you know, Play-Doh for adults. So I've stretched that out now. You can see we've already got quite nice strength in our dough. It's obviously extensible. Now what we're going to do is wet our hands again. It sometimes helps to just wet the edges off. We're going to do our book fold. So what I mean by that is we're going to take this third of the dough and fold it over the middle. Then we're going to take this third of the dough and fold that back over the middle. And then we're going to do the same from top to bottom. So actually, I guess it's more like a letter fold than a book fold. So yeah, let's call it that. We're going to do the letter fold, all right? So fold in that top third of the dough over the middle, pat it down, and then do the same thing from the other side. There we go. Now we'll do that from top to bottom, just giving a good little stretch as we go. Build up that strength and extensibility, and do the same from the bottom. There we go. Look at that. Beautiful. So what we've got there now is a nice little bit of dough that we've built some extra strength into. Quite a lot of strength actually, and we've also built a lot more of those little layers which are going to trap the gas and help give us that nice open crumb that's just going to go woof when it hits the heat of the oven and really expand. Okay, so happy with that. What we'll do now is just transfer it back into our little bowl. Get that in there. Cover it over. And then we're going to leave that at room temperature for about another, let's say, 20 to 40 minutes. On a cool day, maybe you could push it out to an hour. Just sort of check in with it and use your common sense. Okay, get that to one side. Now, moving on to our next step. What we're going to do now is talk a little bit about coil folds. Now this is the next step up from our stretch and folds, which those of you who've done the beginner's course will be familiar with. Basically, you'll find that the stretch and folds will become a bit difficult with a high hydration dough. So this technique works really well when we've got a wetter dough to deal with. And a coil fold is exactly what it sounds like. Look at that, we got a massive bubble there. Check that out. Woohoo! Good fermentation. Okay, so this has been resting for about an hour, covered over, in our bowl, and we're going to go in with our first coil fold now. So, let me show you what we're going to do. We'll wet our hands, and then we're going to tuck our hands in, down the sides of the bowl, getting them in under the dough, and lifting it up, stretching it, stretchy, 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 bring it up, and fold it over. This is where the coil comes in. Fold it over. Cool? Now, spin your bowl around. Get your hands again if you need to. And do the same thing. Repeat from the other side. Lift the dough up, stretchy, 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 and it'll naturally sort of coil in on itself. Okay? Then we do that from the other side. So we're going to do this 4 times, moving around the dough. There we go, nice. And then this side, there we go. Until it's sort of nice and tight. Tight, like a tiger. There we go. It's got a nice bit of bounce to it. Looking awesome. Okay, so that's it. Coil fold done. Let's get that covered over. And we will leave this resting at room temperature for about 20 to 40 minutes. Push that out to an hour on a cooler day. Just sort of see how you go. And I've got one I prepared earlier. Now, we'll move on to the next coil, which is actually the third coil fold in this case. You're probably going to need to do between 2 to 3 coil folds, maybe 4. All depends on the flour you're working with. But what you're looking out for is a little bit of rise, which tells us the fermentation's really going. You'll see a few little bubbles, a couple of bubbles on the top, and you'll also notice that, actually I'm not sure you can notice that on camera, but it's kind of kept its shape. So initially when you do the first coil fold, the dough will just sort of relax and flop back out into the bowl. It won't hold its shape, but as we develop strength in that gluten, it's going to start holding its shape. So that's a really good sign that we've got our dough where we want it to be. So in with hopefully our last coil fold here. Put your hands in. Now, you need to be progressively more gentle in this process, because what we don't want to do is knock all the air out of it. So we want to be quite gentle at this stage in the process, becomes a lot more relaxed with our coil folds. Just tuck your hands in and gently, gently stretch it up, fold it back over. Repeat from the other sides. And at this stage, we're also going to check that our dough is now ready to go on to our bulk proofing stage. Now, a good indication that you've developed all of the strength and extensibility into the dough that we're going to need is to go in there and do the window pane test. So just pinch up a little bit of dough with wet hands, stretch it up, stretch, stretch, stretch. And if you can stretch it out to a nice thin membrane like that you can kind of see the light through and it's not tearing, then we've developed the gluten far enough and we can move on to the next stage. Cool beans. Okay, so tuck that little guy in, cover it over, and now this is the next sort of twist, the next top tip to help you get your artisan sourdough as easily as possible. What we're going to do is allow our dough to do its bulk fermentation overnight in the fridge. And there's two reasons why we do that. It slows down the fermentation process. It allows things to sort of tick along at its own pace, but as well as that, it makes the shaping process a lot easier. If you're dealing with a high hydration dough at room temperature, when it's had a full fermentation and it's billowy and marshmallowy and gorgeous, it can just be a little bit tricky to shape, especially if you haven't done it much before. So by popping it into the fridge for at least 6 hours, but overnight is fine as well, we're going to take the guesswork out of our bulk proof, which is going to mean that we don't have to watch it like a hawk and try and pick that exact moment when our bulk proof is absolutely spot on. We're going to take the guesswork out of it and just roll with it that way. So we'll pop this in the fridge overnight and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Joking, it's one I prepared earlier. So this one's had its bulk proof and you can see that it's lovely and billowy. It's got a lot of jiggle to it. There are heaps of bubbles in there. Look at that wibble. That's what we're looking for. That is a really good sign of a spot on bulk proof. And the other test is that it comes out of the container really easily. So that's our bulk proof done. We're now going to move on to one of our final steps, the shaping process. Now for that, I just need to do a little bit of a tidy up because we need a dry, floured surface to work on here. So I'll just grab this clean tea towel, give things a little bit of a wipe down. Apologies to Kitchen Warehouse, I'm building up a lot of laundry for them here. But it's all in the interest of great bread, so I think it's forgivable. Hopefully. Okay, nice dry countertop. Nice dry hands, and we're going to want to get some flour as well. So get your plain flour here. You can work with the same strong baker's flour that we've been using for our recipe, or just switch to a plain one, depends what you've got the most of. Now we're going to go in and just dust our work surface really well, because we don't want to get ourselves into a sticky situation now. Okay, so get that all over. Get it over the top of the dough as well. And also just sprinkle a little bit over the edge of the bowl there, just to help it sort of ease out. And then what we're going to do is just tip our bowl and get a floured dough scraper and just help it along. Gently nudge it along. Take your time with this. No rush. We don't want to start damaging this beautiful dough that we've put all this work into. We don't want to knock that air out. We just want to help it out of the container. Okay, and then just tip it over and gently ease it out. Try not to stretch it too much. So we want to do that in the next stage when we shape it. You thought I was joking about this, didn't you? We take our time with this stage. There we go. A little bit left there. My great-grand said waste not, want not. We'll add that to our dough batch. Pop that to one side. And now we're going to move on to the shaping. Now, this is a slightly new technique for those of you who have done the beginner's class. We're going to shape a batard here, okay, which is one of those little sort of oval shaped, sort of rectangular shaped loaves. Okay, and that lends itself really well to the artisan loaf because we want to try and get a really nice proud ear here. And that's when you score the dough and it actually lifts up in the baking process and makes like a little lip or an ear along the top of the dough. And that's come to be looked upon as one of the sort of signatures of a really nice artisan loaf. So that's what we're aiming for here. Okay. Now, with this, throughout this process, we want to be really gentle. We don't want to overwork the dough, we don't want to overstretch the dough, we don't want it to start tearing on us because then it's going to get really sticky. So, we're going to be gentle and we're going to take it slow. Now, we'll let that rest for a moment, and if you haven't done this before, or if you're just a bit nervous like me and want to have a warm-up, you can just have a little practice run on a tea towel. So, we'll grab our tea towel. We're going to be stretching our dough to make a little rectangle like that. And what we're going to do is stretch it out, and then we're going to grab the one edge and fold it in like we did with the lamination over the middle part. And then we're going to do the same from the other side. Again, building up those layers inside the dough, which is going to trap all the air bubbles and give us that lovely open crumb, hopefully. And then what we're going to do is slowly, carefully, with intent, grab the edge of the dough and start rolling it in towards us. Okay, so use your hands to sort of scoop it up, index fingers scooping the dough up, rolling it in towards you, and thumbs just tucking it in as we go. Nice and slow. Okay, so that we're going to end up with our seam, which is the open end of the dough, at the bottom of the loaf. And we'll give that a little roll, tighten it up a little bit, and we're going to hopefully have a nice tight shape like that, our nice tightly shaped batard. Right. You can always do that once or twice more if you want to. Just work in a bit of practice first, because you've only got one shot at shaping your dough. Alright, so when you're happy with that, flour your hands really well. And we're gonna just start stretching our dough out. It's a good idea to sort of just pick up the edges and just sort of spin it round, just to make sure it's not stuck to the countertop. And we're just gonna lightly, gently stretch that out till we've got sort of 3 times the width of our banneton. So this is our larger banneton. Okay, so we're gonna get that to the same size as our banneton, and then what we're gonna do is roll it up, and as it relaxes, it's gonna fill out the whole banneton. So we're gonna take the size of our banneton, stretch it out to that, and then we're gonna fold it up in thirds, shooting for not the full width of the banneton. We need to give it some room to expand. So, without further ado, let's get on with this. Lifting up the dough, giving it a light stretch, and folding it over. Little pat down. Nice gentle little pat down. And then we're going to do the same thing from the other side. Fold it over. Nice little pat down. Okay, and you can just sort of lightly tap the tops to sort of seal those edges, seal those seams, Also grab those end corners, give them a little stretch out, because we kind of want the dough to narrow towards the point and be slightly wider at the base to give us a nice even shaped batard. You can just sort of gently tap that down to give you a nice even shape. Right, now flour your hands again, and now we're going to do the rolly up bit. So gently grab the top, tuck it in, fold it over, give it a light stretch out, tuck it in, light roll, light stretch, light tuck. You want to use a nice light touch here, and slowly work your way down the dough. Okay, right to the end. And then we can just sort of gently tuck in around it and underneath. Tuck in those ends. And then we can let it rest for a few minutes, just to let the shape settle, let all those internal little layers seal up, and then we're going to tighten it before it goes into our banneton. Okay, so now grab your banneton, and when we're dealing with a really hydrated dough like this, things can still get a little bit sticky, especially as we're going to have the dough doing a short room temperature proof. So what we want to do here is line our banneton. So get a cloth liner. You can get some really nice sort of fitted cloth liners that'll fit your banneton. Otherwise, if you don't have one of those at hand, you can just use a clean tea towel. So get your clean tea towel, get it into your banneton, tuck it in nicely, and now what we're going to do is flour it quite well with a blend of rice flour and normal flour. That's just a 50-50 blend, and that's a nice sort of non-stick coating for our dough. Just lightly flour our cloth, get that in there, and then we're going to sprinkle it over our dough as well. So unleash your inner Jamie Oliver here and get a nice coating of flour over the top of the dough. Okay, now we're going to just sort of tap that on so that it sticks to the dough. Go around the sides as well, and at this stage we're going to give it a light little tighten up, light little tuck around the sides again. Gently, gently, we don't want to knock the air out of it, remember? If you've got a few air bubbles, don't worry, it's just going to give you some lovely blisters on the crust, which is something we actually want. And if you want to, you can sort of pinch the ends closed. I don't really find that helps too much, so we're not going to bother today. We're just going to grab our bench scraper and transfer it from the bench top into our banneton, and we want it to sit in there seam side up. So, one shot at this. We're going to be very gentle but confident, and we're going to scoop it up and gently tip it into our banneton. Now we can just sort of give it a little jiggle around there, add a little bit of extra flour just for peace of mind. We don't want it to stick in the next stage, and then give it a light little tap down into that. That's looking pretty good. You see, we've got a little bit of space either end for the dough to expand into. Now cover it over lightly, and we're going to give it a room temperature rise. Now this bit's going to take anywhere between an hour to 2.5, 3 hours, depending on your room temperature. Right? So pop that to one side, and keep an eye on it, because we're going to want to make sure that it doesn't overproof. So this has had a room temperature rise for about 2 hours today. It's quite warm today, so not too long. And it's got some nice jiggle to it. It's sort of filled the banneton. You can see I've got a cloth lined banneton here. And one way to tell that we've got the fermentation and the final proof spot on is to just lightly flour the top and give it the poke test. So I'll try and demonstrate this. Now this one is kind of intuitive. You need a bit of practice with it. But basically, just with a floured finger, gently poke the top of the dough about 1 centimeter in. And if the dough springs back in a controlled and considered manner, that was verbatim, then it is absolutely spot on for our bake. So it's sprung back nice and slow, and it's left a slight indent, which is exactly what we're after. So we'll just do that again. And there we go. So I'm really happy with that. That's spot on for us to bake with now. So let's get ourselves set up for baking. Right, there's a step in between the baking, which is where we're going to score our dough. Right, but just very quickly, let's talk a little bit about what we can bake with. And we've got a few options here. We're going to be baking on one of these cast iron griddle pans. Really nice in terms of heat retention. It's going to give us that really good oven spring. And we want to introduce steam into the oven. So we're going to have this on our upper shelf, and then underneath it, we're just going to pop in another little tin, like that, at the bottom of the oven, into which we're going to pour in some boiling water. And that's going to inject a whole bunch of steam to just help that crust stay soft and that loaf open up so that we get that really nice ear. Okay? Now, if you don't have that kind of setup at home, that's absolutely fine. You can actually just use a covered cast iron casserole dish. These ones are really, really good. They're nice because you can flip them over like that. And use that as your steam hood. Take it off like that. Thank you. Or a classic casserole dish like this is absolutely perfect for the job as well. Alright, so before we score, we're going to want to make sure that our oven is screaming hot. We want to get that as hot as it'll go, basically, at least 220, 230 degrees.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Our Instagram live is going to stop and start again, so if anyone wonders, we're coming straight back. It's just that it only goes for an hour, and as you know, sourdough is a process, and we don't want you to miss out on it. So if it stops, it'll go live again, which is what we're about to do now.
Thanks, Joe. Righto, so moving on.
Oh, should I ask you some of the questions while and then you can take your time. People have been very excited about the laminating bread. It's amazing, Ange. They're excited about how organised you've been, and your energy is awesome. Vicky said it's a great idea doing the live workshops. And yes, and how long? Oh, we might answer that one later. The Autolyse process. What's the difference? What difference does it make?
Righto.
Quickly, a very quick one.
That is key to getting our extensible dough. So a long extended Autolyse gives us a more elastic, stretchy, extendable dough. So we took ours for about 3 hours to 5 hours, and that gave us that lovely stretch to begin with, which meant that as soon as we got our leaven into the mixture, it immediately started being caught up within those layers of that nice stretchy dough. And that really helps us with our artisan loaf and the nice open crumb. How are we doing, Joe?
Coming back in again. So we're back on Instagram Live. For those that missed the first part, it will be replayed later on YouTube, Instagram and Facebook. And can I just recommend to people while I'm here, my family at home watch it on the Apple TV. A smart TV is really big. You can get more detail and it's clear as it's perfectly clear. So if you have the opportunity, watch it on a smart TV, and then you get to see Angie's beautiful face bigger.
Oh no, please don't do that. Crop it in so it's just the hands. Watch the hands and the dough, not the face. Okay, how are we doing, Joe? Can we move on to the next stage?
Keep going, thank you.
Excellent, okay. So we're about to score our dough, which has had a short room temperature proof. Ours went for about 2 hours, and we're going to bake it on this really nice cast iron griddle pan. Now, you're going to get that into your preheated oven because we want everything super hot, but in the interest of safety, we won't be doing that today because I'm clumsy at the best of times and I'm a bit nervous today. So we'll just get that out the way. That's what we're going to be baking on. The other thing we're going to want is a nice little piece of baking paper, and that's so that we can move it around and transfer it onto our baking plate. And now the other thing we're going to need, because we're going to be scoring our dough at this stage, is either a nice sharp serrated paring knife like that, but ideally a fancy baker's lamb like this. And that's basically just a razor blade on a stick. So if you don't have one, you can sort of improvise and DIY with a skewer and a razor blade. And you can just sort of carefully get that razor blade out, and we want a nice curved blade to work with, which is going to help lift that ear. So just fashion yourself a little prison shank like that, and that'll do the trick as well. Okay, now we've got a little bit of flour over the top of our dough, and we're going to gently tip it out onto our paper. Okay, gently but confidently. And then lift it out, peel off that cloth liner, and there we go. Lovely. That's looking really nice. Good bit of wobble to that. Now we're going to grab our baker's lamb, and we're going to score a nice little opening along the top of the dough here for it to expand and open up on. So
You have the cast iron tray hot?
yes, preheat whatever you're baking in. Oven needs to be as hot as it'll go, at least 220 degrees if you can. And we're going to preheat whatever we're baking in or on as well. So we're going to bake on the cast iron. That's going to need about 20 minutes in the hot oven to just come up to temperature. All right, so now we're going to score our dough, and we're going to aim for about 1/2 centimeter deep at an angle of about 45 degrees. So if I just show you quickly with the back of the knife, this is sort of the path we're going to take. Around here, kind of curved, we're going to give it a nice little smile, and we're going to score that in at about 1/2 centimeter deep, 45 degrees. Nice and confident. Okay, we're aiming for one movement here. Right, so get your blade in, and you want it sort of curved, concave towards you, I guess is the best way to describe that. And then just get the lamb in, and make sure safety first, no one's behind you, and just draw that back. There we go. And what that's done is created a nice little lip on the dough, which when we introduce heat and steam is going to open up like that and give us a nice little belly on the loaf and a beautiful ear, hopefully. Alright, so I'll just go through that bit there again because I seem to have missed a little bit. Alright, beautiful. And now we're going to get it into our hot oven. So, use your baking paper to transfer it over to your griddle. And we're going to get that into the oven at about, hot as you can go, 220 degrees with steam for the first 25 minutes. So the way we're going to do that is by having a little baking tray underneath. We're going to pour some boiling hot water into, and it's going to cause a huge little steam explosion inside the oven to keep that crust supple and allow that ear to really open up. So we'll take this over to the oven and be right back. And ladies and gentlemen, if I can have your attention, please have a look at that. Now, that is looking beautiful. So, have a look at that area. What have we got here? That's what we were looking for. A nice ear on our dough, on our loaf. And it's opened up beautifully, leaving us this sort of shiny belly bit. We've got a nice artisan crust, lots of bubbles on there. And to confirm that it is properly baked, if you wrap the bottom, you'll get a nice hollow sound. So just to recap the baking there, it went in the oven really hot at about 220 degrees or above with steam for the first 20 to 25 minutes. After which we opened the oven and vented the steam. And if you're using a closed casserole pot or likewise to create a steam environment to bake your bread in, it's at that point that you would have taken the lid off to then be able to bake it for the final 20 to 30 minutes dry, no steam. And that allows it to deeply caramelize and give us this beautiful crust. Now the real key to this, and this is the bit that I always get a little bit nervous / excited about, is cutting the loaf open and seeing what the crumb's like. So bear with me and we'll move on to that. Here we go. Moment of truth, guys. So get yourself a nice sharp bread knife. And we're going to allow our bread to cool for about 20 minutes before we slice it, if you can bear it. That's probably the hardest part of the whole process. That just allows the dough to actually finish baking. That final 20 minutes, it actually continues cooking. And if you can wait for that 20-30 minutes at the end, you'll then find that it keeps a lot better, the crust is a lot more developed, and if we slice it slightly early, you might find that the crumb's a bit gummy. So it is worth waiting that little bit at the end if you can. If you don't have the patience for it, I mean, it's your bread, go for it. So we're just going to get in here and slice this loaf open. Listen to that crackling. Hopefully we'll have a nice thin crackly crust and a nice open crumb. Are we ready? How are we looking? I'm scared to look.
Oh, it looks amazing.
Oh, beautiful. Look at that crumb. That's exactly what we were going for, guys. We've got that nice ear, that beautiful thin caramelized crust, and those lovely big bubbles inside. That nice open textured crumb, which is, I don't think it's particularly practical, because I find that the heaps of butter that I put on top of it tend to fall through the holes, but it is sort of recognized as one of those signs of a really nice artisan loaf. So it's a bit of a challenge to get to, and it's a lot of fun. So definitely give it a go. Alright, so I think what we'll do now is cut up a couple of slices and maybe have a little tasting. What do you reckon, Joe?
Sounds great to me. So while you're cutting them up,
Yeah.
You've had heaps of compliments. We love having you.
Oh, you guys are the best.
Great ear, and it looks
Thank
gorgeous
you.
from Bron. Do you know about a tartine loaf? What they're
Well,
talking
this is
about?
actually it. An artisan loaf like this is that tartine style loaf. So the Tartine Bakery in San Francisco was started up by Chad Robinson, and he sort of started this whole quest for the open crumb loaf like this. So this is a tartine style artisan loaf. We've got slightly higher whole wheat proportion than the traditional tartine recipe to help us with that fermentation, but that's sort of what we're talking about when we're referring to the tartine loaf.
And do you need to have steam in the oven the whole time it's cooking?
No, so steam for the first part of the bake. The first 20 to 25 minutes is when we get that oven spring. So thereafter, steam isn't going to make a difference. You actually don't want steam after that first part if you want a really nice crusty crust. If you prefer a softer crust, then you could bake the whole thing with steam, and that will give you a softer crust. So that is an option. Great question.
Full of compliments about your lovely bread.
Oh, thank you so much, guys. I'm really pleased with this one.
Earlier on, which I'll just try and answer because now we've got a little bit of time. With the starter, lid or covered with a cloth?
I prefer using a lid because if you use a cloth, it can still dry out a bit and get a bit of a crust on the top, which isn't ideal.
Do you sift your flour? Someone else answered that for bread you don't need to.
I don't bother to with bread. You occasionally might see a recipe that calls for it, but I find it's unnecessary.
And the bread blade?
Yes?
The bread blade, is it just sharper than using the smaller knife? Is that the...
Well, the key thing about the lamb is it's curved. So that curve on the blade helps cut the scoring at an angle where it opens up really nicely. If you're using a straight blade like that, you don't tend to get that nice lip, so you won't get as much of a prominent ear when you do score it. So if you can get hold of a lamb, it's the best way to go.
Can you use a pizza stone?
You can indeed. You could bake on a pizza stone. Cast iron and pizza stones work just as well. I've just found that when you introduce steam into the oven, it's slightly safer to have a cast iron base rather than pizza stone. I've heard about them exploding before.
Maria has asked, would it have helped to have oiled the container on that process that was towards the end? Do you ever oil the container to let it fall out easier?
You definitely can do that. You can put a light coating of oil into the container before your bulk ferment, but I actually use how easily it comes out as an indication of how well the fermentation has gone, and it helps me gauge what stage that bulk development's at. So whatever works for you. This is how I make bread. The way you're going to make it will, even if you follow the recipe exactly the first time round, a couple of times down the line, it's going to be a bit different. That's the beauty of sourdough.
Okay, and Tristan Licious is asking, I'm not sure I understand it, can you use more coils than 2? Do you know what that means?
You can do more than 2 or 3 coil folds. So generally, 2 to 3 coil folds is enough to get your strength into the dough and really develop that strength and elasticity. Sometimes the flour demands an extra coil fold or 2, and sometimes, we just want to do it again because it's fun. But just be careful not to overwork the dough. If you want to do the coil folds more often, then just do shorter rests in between, and then you can squeeze in about 5 to 6 coil folds. No dramas.
And just one last question from Wayne. How important is the hot plate for oven spring?
Crucial. So we want a screaming hot oven and a screaming hot plate to get it into, which will give it that really dramatic pop when it hits the oven. So the hotter we can get that base, the more oven spring we're actually going to get, because the dough hits the plate, we get that initial heat on contact, and it just makes those little air bubbles inside expand dramatically, which gives us that lovely oven spring. Great question.
So that's the end of today's intermediates. Oops, I need to come in closer, which means you need to go that way a little bit. So that's the end of our intermediate sourdough. I think you'll agree that Ange has done an amazing job again. Everyone's loving the workshops from what you've been saying, and we'd really love to hear what other workshops you'd like to have. We'd love to have Ange along again. If there's anything else you'd like to know that you feel like you've missed out on, you can watch it on the Facebook, Instagram and YouTube, and as I said, on a smart TV you can get more detail on the Facebook app, Facebook Watch I believe it is, according to Grant. But so for today, that's thank you to Ange. Just to keep you posted, we've got a few more workshops over the next couple of weeks. We've got gnocchi next week, and we've also got dumplings with Jenny Lamb. We tomorrow, actually it's already up now if you want to have a look, part 1 of the family down at the farm, which is where the Kitchen Warehouse family normally is, a big huge gathering. It's a little bit smaller this year, but they're going to take you and show you the beautiful views and what goes on down at the farm. But for now, thank you for joining us, and thank you for being patient with our volumes and things like that, and thank you to Ange.
And thank you Kitchen Warehouse, and thanks guys for tuning in. Send through your questions and I'll answer them as best I can, and hit up Instagram and Facebook for other recipes and top tips.
So Ange from Breadsmith Sourdough, you'll be able to find her
Sourdough Breadsmith.
Oh, I did it again. See, this is, yeah, that's why I ask. I get it wrong. Nerves. Anyway, thank you again for joining us. Thanks. See you later.
See you guys. Happy baking.